All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a massive 3,400-kilometer frontier, and on either side you have two of the world's biggest nations, both armed with nuclear weapons, locked in this incredibly tense standoff that's been going on for decades. But look, this isn't just any old border. This is the highest, most brutal battleground on the entire planet.
And that quote really says it all, doesn't it? We are talking about the Himalayas, the literal roof of the world. Just try to picture a cold, windswept desert of glaciers and mountain peaks soaring over 5,000 meters. Trying to operate here is a logistical nightmare. For centuries, this impossible terrain was a natural wall between them. But today it's the very center of a really dangerous rivalry.
And here's where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. I mean, think about it. In this age of spy satellites and stealth drones, why on earth are soldiers from two of the world's most powerful militaries fighting each other hand to hand with, sticks and clubs? Well, the answer actually goes back to a bunch of agreements from the 90s. Both sides agreed not to use firearms near the border to stop a small skirmish from accidentally turning into a full-blown war. A rule with good intentions for sure, but it has led to these absolute brutal, medieval-style brawls.
So that brings us to what's happening right now, in January 2026. This long, cold peace is being pushed to its limits, pretty much every single day. A whole series of recent events has brought this already fragile situation to what feels like a real breaking point.
What's so fascinating here is how the pressure is being applied from all sides, all at once. Look at this timeline. On January 14th, India is protesting new Chinese construction. Just 4 days later, we hear about China's massive push to build new villages right on the frontier. The very next day, the fight moves to the economy, with China taking India to the WTO. And then, maybe the most alarming move of all, China ramps up its military presence near a place called the Chicken's Neck.
And you really need to understand why this is such a big deal. The Siliguri Corridor, or the Chicken's Neck, is an incredibly narrow and vulnerable strip of land for India. It's the only thing connecting the Indian mainland to 8 of its states in the northeast. If that corridor were ever cut, India would be physically split. So you can see why any Chinese military activity nearby is seen as a direct and very serious threat in New Delhi.
But why is all this happening in the first place? I mean, how did we even get here? To really get a handle on the crisis today, we have to rewind the clock. Because the root of this whole problem, it's not new. It's actually baked right into the history and the geography of the border itself.
This right here is the fundamental issue. Imagine you're trying to solve a property dispute with your neighbor, but there's no official property line on any map, no deed. No one can agree where the fence is supposed to be. Now just scale that problem up to the size of the Himalayan mountains. That is basically what India and China have been dealing with for decades, along something they call the line of actual control.
And a big reason for this whole mess is just plain old history. Back when the British Empire was drawing lines on maps all over the world, they came up with something called the McMahon Line in 1914. For India, that line is the official, legitimate border, but for China, they see it as a scar left over from colonialism, something that was forced on them and that they never, ever accepted. So you have two powers staring at the same line on a map with two completely different interpretations of what it means.
And these disagreements have definitely not stayed on paper. They've boiled over into real conflict. 3 events really shaped everything. First, in 1950, China took control of Tibet. And just like that, the huge natural buffer that had always separated the two countries was gone. Then, in 1962, a short, vicious war ended in a really painful defeat for India, leaving these deep psychological scars that still haven't healed. And then, much more recently in 2020, we had the Galan Valley clash, that hand-to-hand combat we talked about, which led to the first combat deaths on the border in 45 years. It completely shattered a long, uneasy peace. Today, that simmering conflict has transformed into something new. It's not just about soldiers on patrol anymore. It has become a full-blown race. A race to build infrastructure, to connect remote areas, and to basically change the facts on the ground across the roof of the world.
And if you look at what China's doing, the scale of it is just immense. They are building this huge network of what's called dual-use infrastructure. Now, that means these all-weather roads, these high-altitude airstrips, and these new railways can be used by civilians, but they also let China move its military, troops, tanks, supplies, to the border faster than ever before in history.
And of course, India is now scrambling to keep up. They're drilling these massive tunnels through mountains just to keep the roads open during the brutal winters. They're building their own strategic highways, and they're upgrading their air bases. It's basically a massive, high-stakes construction race happening on both sides of a line that no one can even agree on. And this number highlights one of China's most effective strategies. This isn't just about concrete and asphalt, it's about people. By building over 600 new villages and basically paying its citizens to move into them, Beijing is creating a permanent human presence in these disputed areas. It's a way of cementing its claims, making them much, much harder to challenge in the future.
So, okay, they're clearly rivals on the border. You would think they'd want nothing to do with each other economically, right? Well, this is where the whole story gets even more complicated and kind of paradoxical.
Even though they are huge trading partners, the relationship is completely lopsided. I mean, just look at the gap on this chart. India buys way more stuff from China than it sells to them, and that creates a serious economic dependency, which makes India's economy pretty vulnerable, especially when things get tense politically.
And this leads to what experts call weaponized interdependence. When there's a clash on the border, the fight immediately spills over into the economy. So, India has banned popular Chinese apps like TikTok, saying they're a security risk. And in response, China has throttled exports of critical materials that India really needs, like rare earth minerals. So trade, the one thing that should be bringing them closer, just becomes another battleground.
Now, let's zoom out for a second, because this rivalry doesn't exist in a bubble. It's actually a really important piece in a much bigger geopolitical game. Both countries are busy building alliances that stretch all across the globe.
And this chart here lays it out pretty clearly. You can just see the two different paths they're taking. China works very closely with its strategic partners, Pakistan and Russia. India, on the other hand, has been getting closer and closer to the United States, Japan, and Australia through a group called the Quad, which most people see as a democratic alliance meant to counterbalance China.
But India's path is anything but simple. It's trying to pull off this incredible high-wire act. It still depends on Russia for a ton of its military equipment, but at the very same time, it's cozying up to the US to help push back against China. This foreign policy is called strategic autonomy, and let me tell you, it is incredibly difficult to maintain when the world's great powers are basically asking you to pick a side.
So after looking at the border, the infrastructure race, the trade wars, the global alliances, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a status quo that is deeply unstable.
You can really sum up the entire India-China relationship today in these three phrases. There's a kind of peace on the border, but there is zero trust. There's a massive amount of trade between them, but it's not based on friendship. It's purely transactional. And there is this intense, simmering rivalry that has somehow, so far, managed to stop just short of a full-scale war.
With every new road they build, every new village they populate, and every new diplomatic move they make, the situation just gets more complex and more risky. The original problems have never been solved, and now both sides are stronger and more capable of projecting military power into the Himalayas than ever before. Which of course leaves us with that final, critical question. How long can a peace without trust, a stalemate this fragile, actually last?